For nearly 3 weeks now, Iranians have marched in the streets to denounce the Islamic regime that's ruled for more than 40 years.
The storm within Iran is brewing. Tensions between its hardline leadership and a restless population are reaching a boiling point. With Ayatollah Ali Khamenei demanding a direct strike on Israel, the nation stands on the edge of a dangerous precipice. Meanwhile, newly elected President Massud Peskiyan pleads for restraint, warning of the catastrophic fallout such an action could bring. The clash between unyielding aggression and a desperate call for caution is pushing Iran to the brink.
Witnesses could hear gunfire and explosions.
And as the pressure mounts, the threat of chaos looms ever closer. The conflict within Iran's leadership. Despite growing tensions with Israel over the years, the fundamental policy of the Islamic Republic has been to avoid all forms of direct confrontation. Instead, it seeks to use proxy groups across the Middle East like pieces on a chessboard, sponsoring attacks, promoting dissenting movements, and silently financing campaigns against Israel. But everything changed in 2024. Motivated by recent offensive moves by Israel and demands made by his supporters, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei made a dramatic shift in strategy. Rather than hide behind other nations and agencies, he accepted the ever-present risk of engaging in direct confrontations. In the much volatile Middle East, this was a move that could signal a devastating war. But for Iran, it was a long time coming. However, the situation isn't exactly black or white, good or evil. Within Iran itself, there is growing concern about whether the nation can afford such an escalation. Way before this recent shift in the conflict, Iran's policy-making process has been more hierarchical than systematic. Unlike other nations, Iran's Ministry of Foreign Affairs does not play a major part in decision-making about foreign policies. Strange as it may seem, it's an issue that has been lingering for a hot minute. During their time, former Iranian President Hassan Rouhani and former Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif frequently expressed criticism about the fact that the nation would rather choose military actions than diplomacy. But Supreme Leader Khamenei has remained assertive in his decisions. Addressing the issue back in April 2021, he stated that foreign policy is determined in high-level forums around the world, not in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He also maintained that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs participates in setting policies but is not the decision-maker, it is the executor. With the recent escalation between Israel and Iran, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and Iran's newly elected President Massud Peskiyan have found themselves on polar opposite ends. On one hand, there's the Supreme Leader, calling for a reprisal attack to avenge Iran's honor in spite of the risk of escalation. On the other end, there's the new president, seeking a simpler way to reduce tensions while still maintaining the dignity of his nation. On several occasions, Peskiyan has pleaded with the Supreme Leader to refrain from plotting a vengeance plan, and instead, look at the bigger picture. But it's been an uphill battle, one that the president may be fighting alone. Many of the biggest names in Iranian politics have offered support for an escalation. The mainstream media also seems to want a war. But how will Khamenei and Peskiyan manage this conflict of interests? And what does this really mean for both the Iranian people, the State of Israel, and the Middle East as a whole? Growing popular unrest in Iran. After Hamas launched the infamous October 7, 2023 attack on Israel, the whole of Iran erupted in celebration. Just 3 days later, Khamenei was speaking at a graduation ceremony at the military academy, and he confirmed that the Iranian government had nothing to do with it. This was contrary to the conspiracy theories being spread online, suggesting that this was done with the blessing and support of Iran. However, the Supreme Leader also clearly stated that he was in full support of the operation, which killed over 1,000 Israelis in a single day. Most of them were civilians. Khamenei wasn't the only top Iranian government official to offer support, though. The late President Ebrahim Raisi, ministers in his cabinet, and several members of parliament also praised Hamas for the attack. Even top military officers celebrated the event as a victory for Palestine. Supporters of the regime staged fireworks. They organized public celebrations in at least 8 cities. They came together to celebrate what was meant to be the beginning of the collapse of Israel. However, this sentiment was not shared by everyone. Moderate and reformist groups have a rather polarizing stance on the whole situation. Hassan Rouhani, President Raisi's predecessor, former parliamentary speaker Ali Larijani, as well as former Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council Ali Shamkhani, appeared to distance themselves from the events. Then there's the former foreign minister and nuclear negotiator Ali Salehi, who spoke to the Iranian media, warning that the situation was more complicated than many government officials realize. He also claimed that the people in government should have refrained from making rash comments about the situation so as to avoid triggering escalations. While his statement was a bit tame, others expressed their displeasure in more colorful words. Political analyst Sadegh Zigakalam made a post on his Instagram page where he stated that Iranians who supported Palestine during the 1979 revolutions only did that because of their opposition to the monarchy system in Iraq. At the time, the monarchy had unofficial ties with Israel. But today, because of the enmity of the Islamic Republic with Israel, regime opponents consider Hamas a terrorist entity and voice their support for the Israel operation in Gaza. But what do the ordinary Iranians think about the conflict? According to multiple reports, most Iranians believe that Iran's involvement is simply taking the place of the pressing needs of the Iranian people. Days after the October 7th attack by Hamas, Iranians outside the regime have taken different positions on the situation, from those who offered unrelenting support for Israel to people who condemned Hamas, and others who expressed their anger at Israel for bombing the civilians living in the Gaza Strip. During a football match in Tehran's Azadi Stadium, some regime supporters showed their solidarity by waving Palestinian and Hamas flags. Spectators then reacted by chanting anti-Hamas and pro-Israeli slogans. Zainav Mousavi, a comedian who has been sent to jail for criticizing the Iranian regime, also had a word for Hamas supporters. "Cheer you warmongers. War has started. Women and children and innocent people will be killed, and homes will be ruined. Hundreds of thousands of people will be driven out of their homes to enable you to cheer in joy." Nasrin Shakarami, whose daughter was killed during the protest enforcing veiling for women, human rights activist Atena Daimi, and Taghi Rahmani, husband of Nobel Peace Prize winner Nargis Mohammadi, all expressed their outrage for Iran's public support towards Hamas. Fatemeh Sepehri, another Iranian serving a long prison sentence for writing an open letter demanding Khamenei's resignation, also wrote from her hospital bed, stating that the people of Iran stand with Israel and not with terrorists. Other activists have also shared their views, criticizing both Hamas and Israel. Azar Mansouri, head of the Iran Reforms Front, called out the Iranian leaders for supporting Hamas. While this sentiment may not be popular considering Israel's reputation on the global stage, many Iranians believe this is not their war to fight. The Iranian government, on the other hand, has an entirely different plan. Iran's retaliation plans. On July 31, 2024, Hamas's top political leader, Ismail Haniyeh, was assassinated in Tehran. His personal bodyguard, Wasim Abu Shaban, was also murdered in the attack. Haniyeh, who commandeered many attacks against Israel, was in the country to attend the inauguration of the newly appointed Iranian President Massud Peskiyan and was staying in a guest house protected by heavily armed Iranian soldiers. Before his death, Haniyeh served as a prominent figure in Hamas since it was first founded in 1987. He also previously served as the Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority and as the Hamas chief in the Gaza Strip. At the time of his death, Haniyeh was the highest-ranking Hamas political leader killed by the Israelis since the start of the Israel-Hamas war. How did he really die, though? That was a subject of serious debate. According to a member of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, the Hamas leader was targeted by a quadcopter after his location was revealed by his bodyguards. There's another story by a Lebanese outlet known as Al Mayadeen, which has close ties with Hezbollah. According to their narrative, Haniyeh was hit by a missile fired by Israeli forces from outside Iran. Sky News Arabia and Channel 12 reported that the assassination was carried out with a missile fired from within Iran. But the New York Times had an even more elaborate story. They claimed that Haniyeh was actually taken out by a remotely detonated explosive device hidden inside his room. The bomb was said to have been smuggled into the heavily guarded building around 2 months earlier and was detonated once it was confirmed that Haniyeh was in the room. While the true cause of the Hamas leader's death has remained a subject of speculation, Iran's reaction to the attack has created a new discussion entirely. Not only was the dual assassinations a serious blow to Hamas and Hezbollah, but it also raised the stakes for Iran, who vowed revenge for the killing. Considering how volatile the region has been, especially with the Israel-Hamas war, this instantly escalated things to a whole new level. After news of Haniyeh's death became public, a senior officer of the group released a statement describing his assassination as a cowardly act that will not go unpunished. In addition, officials from Qatar and Egypt also warned that this singular action could set the ceasefire talks back several steps. You will recall that before the killing, Israel and Gaza were contemplating reaching a compromise that would put an end to the incessant attacks on the Palestinian people, and a deal to release the hostages held by Hamas. But this literally changed everything, at least according to the mediators. On August 9, 2024, Iran called an emergency meeting of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, a group of 57 countries. The meeting, held in the Saudi city of Jeddah, was to discuss Khamenei's assassination, as well as the measures Iran is willing to take in retaliation for the attack. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei, who had previously vowed to unleash a harsh punishment on Israel, used the opportunity to lay out the many reasons he believed escalation was the only way forward. Bakari Ali Khamenei, Iran's acting foreign minister, claimed that his country had no choice but to respond, and that this offensive would take place at the right time and in the appropriate shape. He also claimed that the Iranian reaction would not only be a defense of its own sovereignty and national security, but also a defense of the stability and security of the entire region. Since this meeting, the whole world has been waiting for the moment when Iran would finally fulfill its vows of unleashing terror on Israel. Every sign, every speech, and every statement from Iran has been closely watched to catch an indication of how the response would take place and what would happen whenever Iran chooses to attack. This, however, wasn't the first time this year that Israel and Iran would engage in a face-off. Earlier in April 2024, the world found itself on the brink of World War III after an Israeli strike leveled an Iranian diplomatic compound in Damascus, the nation's capital. 8 officers of Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps were killed, and the nation was left embarrassed in the wake of the attack. For the first time in the history of the nation, Iran was forced to launch an attack against Israel from her own soil. 300 missiles and drones flew in from Iran, in one of the biggest military campaigns against Israel since the start of the war. Not surprisingly, almost all of them were intercepted by Israel, with help from the coalition headed by the United States. The impact of the attack was quite insignificant. However, this next offensive might actually take an even greater dimension than this first attempt. In an attempt to establish diplomacy as opposed to a brutal global war no one really needs, Jordan's foreign minister paid a rare visit to Iran to advocate for de-escalation. So did French President Emmanuel Macron, who spoke to Peskiyan, urging him to do everything possible to avoid a military response. While the whole world waited for the promised attack on Israel, there were also threats from Hezbollah, a Lebanese militia and political movement backed by Iran. You see, Khamenei wasn't the only target assassinated on July 31st. Hours before his death, Israel also assassinated Fuad Shukr, Hezbollah's senior commander in its stronghold of Dahiya. But in the midst of the conflict, Iran's new President Massud Peskiyan has raised a slightly different message. Speaking to the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, Peskiyan pleaded for a peaceful resolution, warning that an attack would only make the situation more dire for the Iranian people. He also cautioned that if Iran decided to launch the attack, Israel could respond with a heavy hand, and the harsh retaliatory attack could lead to the destruction of national infrastructure. The energy resources could be affected, and the blow on the economy could lead to the country's collapse. But despite the warnings, Khamenei remains indecisive, neither supporting nor opposing the president's concerns. The president also noted that many senior military commanders were pushing agendas that could drag the country into a war, and while it was necessary to repair the nation's bruised ego, the projected aftermath doesn't appear to be worth the carnage that may result from such actions. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps stance. After announcing his decision not to pursue military actions against Israel, Iran's president has been under pressure from the powerful Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. According to reports from within Iran, the IRGC is calling for a direct and severe missile strike on several Israeli targets, including Tel Aviv and other major cities. The president, however, doesn't want to deal with a war in his first few days in office. Instead of going all out and calling for widespread conflict, Peskiyan proposed a few calculated strikes on alleged Mossad bases located outside Israel, particularly in the Republic of Azerbaijan and in Kurdistan, Iraq. By taking this high road, he believes that the risk of a full-scale battle would be averted and Iran would be saved from the horrors of war. A close aide of the president revealed that Peskiyan has also suggested notifying Azerbaijan and Iraq before any strikes, so as to avoid triggering a reprisal attack from the two nations against Iran. But the president has been fighting an uphill battle. You see, in the history of Iraq, the IRGC has enjoyed a level of autonomy and influence within the Iranian government. This allows them to make decisions, propose military solutions, and carry out attacks with little resistance from the executive government. With the backing of the supreme leader, their freedom has been without bounds. This also means that they've been actively working to undermine Peskiyan's efforts, while calling for a total war against Israel. According to a statement released by a senior official of the IRGC, the organization has been largely dismissive of the president's tame approach. They want war, and the number one plan on the table is to strike Tel Aviv in conjunction with Hezbollah and other allies. Esmail Khani, the commander of the elite Quds force of the IRGC, has voiced his support for an immediate and decisive retaliation since the assassination. Since the IRGC is mainly loyal to Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the president's order hasn't shifted their stance in the slightest. An aide close to the president also revealed that the IRGC has been pushing aggressively for a response that would avenge the humiliation the nation has suffered at the hands of Israel. As it stands, only time will tell which side will win the argument, and whatever decision Iran makes could either lead to peace or transform the Middle East into a brutal battlefield. Public reaction and fear of war. As the threats of an Iran escalation lingers in the air, Israeli officials have also been getting ready for an attack that could trigger World War III. According to reports from Israel officials, there is a general consensus that Hezbollah would launch an attack against Israel in the coming days, although the details are still unknown. In preparation for the military operations, hospitals in Israel have been gearing up to receive an influx of wounded people. Search and rescue battalions have been sent to big cities, and large outdoor gatherings have been banned in northern Israel. However, no serious restrictions have been placed on civilian activities, nor has the emergency guidelines been changed. Nations around the world have also been reacting to this threat of a regional war, with many calling for peaceful dialogues rather than brutal displays of violence. As part of efforts to create a diplomatic pipeline to resolve the issues, Malaysia presented a proposal at a meeting held in Jeddah that an emergency session of the United Nations General Assembly be held. This way, powerful figures of the body would be able to deliberate on how to give effect to the advisory opinion by the International Court of Justice about Israel's apartheid policies. But while many nations in the Middle East have taken a stance on the Iranian side, others have pledged their support for Israel. During a side meeting between Jordan's foreign minister, Ayman Safadi, and the acting Iranian foreign minister, Ali Bagheri, Jordan revealed that it would shoot down any Iranian missiles or drones that enter Jordan's airspace on its way to Israel. Safadi stated in very clear terms that Jordan would not be a battleground for any nation. We will not allow anybody, to the extent that we can, to violate our airspace. Our first responsibility is towards our people, protecting the sovereignty of our country and the safety of our people. So our position is that nobody should use our airspace. Nobody should subject our people to the threat of any projectile falling over any of our territories and harming our people. And that is a position that we've communicated to both the Iranians and the Israelis in very unequivocal terms. It appears that Jordan is trying to separate itself from the conflict to avoid death and destruction within its territory. Being a neighboring nation to Israel, Jordan stands the risk of getting entangled in any war that erupts in the nation. Earlier, the United States also revealed plans to send messages to Iran, suggesting that an attack would be counterproductive, especially when Israel and Hamas were close to reaching a ceasefire agreement. However, it remains unclear whether this ceasefire will eventually be reached. French President Emmanuel Macron also called on the new Iranian president, urging him and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu not to kickstart an unending cycle of violence. But Peskiyan responded by stating that Iran would not remain silent in the face of aggression against its interests and security. He informed Macron that rather than focusing on Iran, Western nations should put more pressure on Israel. If the genocide being committed by Israel on Gaza is brought to a halt, then Iran would rethink its decision to launch an attack on Israel. Iran is also angered by the fact that neither the United Kingdom nor France nor the United States have condemned Khamenei's assassination. However, Peskiyan has also been distracted by a few issues arising in his own home. As a new president, His first order of business was to form a new cabinet, which would then be put to Parliament for affirmation. The president maintained that his goal was to form a government of national unity rather than a reformist faction-led administration. As the rumors of war linger in the Middle East, Russian President Vladimir Putin has also urged Iran to avoid implicating civilians in its military response. In a statement issued by Putin's former Secretary of Defense and Secretary of the National Security Council of Russia, Sergei Shoigu, during his visit to Tehran, the Russian official stressed that the revenge plans for Khamenei's killings should not get out of hand. Saudi Arabia has also released a statement addressing the assassination as a blatant violation of Iran's sovereignty. The sentiment was echoed by the Saudi Deputy Foreign Minister, Walid al-Khuraiji, during a meeting of members of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. During his address, he confirmed that Saudi Arabia clearly rejects any violation of Iran's territorial integrity or interference in the affairs of the country. The United States has also been working behind the scenes to turn the temperature down in the Middle East and resolve the tensions before it's too late. While addressing the United Nations Security Council, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, revealed that the United States wants to deter and defend against any future attack and avoid regional conflict. President Joe Biden has also called for an immediate ceasefire between Israel and Gaza, hoping that this could ease the tension in Iran. But there might be a little problem with that plan. You see, while several political figures, including U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and international mediators from Egypt and Qatar, have planned to gather for peace talks in Doha, Hamas may be unwilling to pursue this route. According to Ahmad Abdul Hadi, a Hamas official in Lebanon, the armed group isn't willing to take part in any talks. Unless the two sides reach a compromise, though, there is still a very high possibility that the entire region would be thrust into a massive conflict. The broader geopolitical impact. Hypothetically speaking, what if Iran attacks Israel on a scale that we've never seen? How will that move affect the energy market and economies around the world? The answer isn't so straightforward. See, even though the energy markets have been quite unaffected by the rising tensions in the Middle East for a while, this stability may not really last. First, there's the possibility that Israel would retaliate by attacking Iran's oil production, which may plunge the oil and gas industry into a crisis. Of course, trade in natural gas has been rerouted in cases of Houthi attacks in the past, with Qatar taking the lead in stabilizing the situation. But what happens when Hezbollah is also pulled into the war? What happens when the war reaches a peak that the whole world cannot ignore? We've seen this happen with the Russian-Ukraine war and the damaging effects it had on the global economy. But this could be even more devastating. At the barest minimum, we could see a dramatic increase in shipping costs based on military activities in the Persian Gulf. There would be mounting pressure on the US and European insurance clubs to avoid making any transactions that include Iranian crude. There could be additional rerouting of oil and gas shipments in response to either the Houthis response or military actions by allied forces. But what happens when Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz? In case you don't realize how significant this move may be, here's a brief overview. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow waterway that every ship exiting and entering the Persian Gulf must pass through. According to statistical data, about 21% of the total liquid petroleum produced around the world travels through the Strait of Hormuz, which makes it the most important transit checkpoint in the world. Imagine if Iran was forced to shut down this transit. Oil supply around the world would immediately be crippled. The most impact would be felt by the Asian continent, as 80% of the crude oil transported through the Strait of Hormuz is shipped to Asian customers. Some time ago, Iran threatened to shut down the strait, but never went through with it. If the strait was ever closed, though, there's a very high chance it would still remain open to Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, and Emirati oil. This is because if it ever closes the passageway completely, the United States would deploy naval forces to prohibit any ship carrying oil from Iran from exiting the Persian Gulf. Since Iran's economy is completely dependent on this oil trade, it wouldn't want to risk getting banned from shipping its most valuable resources, which would trigger a total economic collapse. Even though Iran's oil is under heavy sanctions and the trades are essentially illegal, buyers have their ways of evading these sanctions by masking the true origins of the oil they purchase. However, if the United States starts enforcing the sanctions more strictly, which is likely to happen should a war break out, then Iran would simply shut down the strait since it has nothing to lose. A new player in the game might offer the edge Iran really needs, though. Enter Russia, the arch-rival of the West and villain of the modern era. For decades, Russia has tried to keep its distance from the dramatic events that envelop the Middle East, while maintaining communications with all parties involved. But with the ongoing war between Israel and Gaza, sitting on the fence has become increasingly difficult. As the relations between Russia and the United States deteriorate further and further, Russia is slowly getting in bed with Tehran. Even though Russia acts like it's trying to perform a balancing act in the Middle East, its rivals believe it has taken a side. Of course, Russia has made it very clear that it isn't willing to enter a full military alliance with Iran, but with the recent escalations, nothing is off the table. There have been exchanges of military tech between the two nations, intelligence has been shared, and there is a high chance that Russia may be forced to finally take sides if Iran and Israel get into a violent scuffle. It's worth noting that while this war may begin in the Middle East, it will not end there. Considering the growing tensions between many world powers and the constant threat of a global conflict, we may be right on the edge of the most brutal war the world has ever seen. The future of Iran's leadership. Iran is in a tricky situation both within and without, and no one can predict how it will turn out. In the past 5 elections held in the nation, Supreme Leader Khamenei has faced massive boycotts from both the ordinary Iranians and the factions labeled as reformists and moderates. This became more evident in the last election, where he was forced to release a level of control to the rival faction. Massud Peskiyan, regarded as the least threatening figure from the faction, was allowed to participate in the dramatic presidential elections. Despite his differing political opinions, Peskiyan aligned with Khamenei during his campaigns. He showed up in IRGC uniforms, paid homage to central figures in the movement, and opposed any deviation from the supreme leader's directives. But after securing the victory, things are beginning to change. Fractured and plagued by an array of internal crises, those on Khamenei's side have vouched to frustrate his efforts to form a government. The ordinary Iranians, who have become increasingly vocal over the years, are demanding more freedom of expression. They want internet access, liberty to dress like they want, the release of political prisoners, and several other fundamental human rights. On the other side, Iran has also faced isolation from the rest of the world. Its desire for missile expansion and constant warmongering has made it a spectacle in the Middle East, and very few people want to be implicated in the conflict that Iran may soon find itself in. As it stands, Khamenei is left with a vital choice. He could continue with the threats against other nations, weakening his regime in the process and risking an uprising in his own country. Or he could sacrifice Peskiyan and his supporters as scapegoats, while still continuing his confrontations both at home and abroad. Either way, the fate of the regime hangs in the balance, and with it, the future of the ordinary Iranians. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.